While I was in the hospital, my boyfriend posted something that I never thought I would see. Smiling beside someone else, he wrote, "Life finally feels light again." 4 years together erased in one caption. I said nothing. But hours later, his messages started flooding in panic regret excuses. And then came the call I never expected. But everything changed after it. My name is Nia, and I am 29 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut dead weight out of your life to protect your peace and your sanity. You will definitely want to hear how I handled the ultimate betrayal. The anesthesia was still wearing off, leaving my body feeling like it was made of lead. I woke up to the sterile smell of the hospital room and the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor next to my bed. The pain in my abdomen was a sharp, grounding reminder of where I was and what had just happened. I had just undergone a major, incredibly painful surgery to remove multiple uterine fibroids. It is a terrifying and vulnerable experience, one that threatens your physical core and leaves you completely drained. For months, I had been carrying that physical burden, pushing through the exhausting symptoms while balancing my high-pressure career as a financial analyst and quietly building the technical foundation for my boyfriend's startup company. I slowly turned my head, fighting through the grogginess, expecting to see Marcus sitting in the uncomfortable vinyl guest chair by the window. I expected to see his familiar face, maybe looking a little tired, but relieved that I made it through the operation safely. But the chair was empty. The room was dark, illuminated only by the harsh fluorescent light spilling in from the hallway. I swallowed hard, feeling the dry scratchiness in my throat. Before they wheeled me into the operating room early that morning, Marcus had kissed my forehead and promised he would be waiting right here when I opened my eyes. He told me he just had to take care of one quick meeting regarding his latest round of venture capital funding. He swore it would only take an hour. With trembling fingers, I reached over to the rolling tray table and grabbed my phone. I assumed there would be a missed call or a sweet text saying he was downstairs grabbing a coffee or stuck in traffic on the way back to the hospital. Instead, the lock screen was completely clear of messages from him. Confused and hurting, I unlocked the phone and instinctively opened social media. Right at the top of my feed was a brand new post from Marcus. It had been uploaded just 2 hours ago, right around the time the surgeons were stitching me back together. I stared at the bright screen, the harsh light burning my tired eyes as my heart dropped straight into my stomach. It was a picture of Marcus sitting at a lavish Michelin-starred restaurant downtown. He was wearing the custom navy blue suit I had bought for his birthday. He looked immaculate, successful, and incredibly happy. But it was the woman sitting intimately close to him that made the air leave my lungs. Her name was Chloe. She was the 25-year-old daughter of the city's most prominent venture capitalist. She was dripping in old money, wearing a designer silk dress, her head tilted perfectly toward his shoulder. Marcus had his arm wrapped securely around her waist, holding a crystal glass of champagne in his other hand. They looked like a power couple celebrating a massive victory. But the image was not the worst part. It was the caption underneath it. "Life finally feels light again." I read those 6 words over and over until they blurred together. Life finally feels light again. After 4 years of unwavering loyalty, after funding his early business ventures from my own savings, after spending my nights coding the risk management algorithms his entire company relied on, this was how he viewed me. While I was lying on a surgical table having tumors cut out of my body, fighting for my health, I was nothing but a heavy burden he was relieved to cast off. He was toasting to a light and easy life with a trust fund heiress, while I bled in a hospital bed alone. A normal person might have screamed. Another woman might have immediately called him, crying hysterically, demanding to know how he could do something so cruel. I did not shed a single tear. A strange, freezing calmness washed over my entire body, numbing the surgical pain radiating from my stomach. The deep betrayal did not break me. It recalibrated me. I looked at the picture one last time. I did not comment. I did not block him. I slowly moved my thumb and double-tapped the image. A little red heart popped up on the screen. I liked the photo. Then I locked my phone, set it face down on the tray table, closed my eyes, and leaned my head back against the stiff hospital pillow. I surrendered to the silence of the room. I knew exactly what that notification would do to him. I knew that in the middle of his fancy dinner, his phone would vibrate. He would glance down, expecting to see a congratulatory message from a colleague, and instead, he would see that his girlfriend, the one currently recovering from a major surgery, had just liked his blatant display of disrespect. It took exactly 14 minutes for the panic to set in. My phone began to vibrate against the plastic tray, a low, continuous buzz that echoed in the quiet room. I opened my eyes and watched the screen light up. It was Marcus. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. 10 seconds later it rang again. Ignored. Then came the flood of text messages lighting up the dark room in rapid succession. Nia, please pick up. It is not what it looks like, I swear to you. Chloe is just a business associate. Her dad insisted we take a photo for the firm's PR team. I was forced to post that caption. It was their marketing guy's idea to hype up the new funding round. Nia, talk to me, please. I am on my way to the hospital right now. I watched his desperate excuses roll in one by one. The confident, arrogant man in the photograph was rapidly unraveling, terrified of the silent treatment. He knew how much I knew about his business. He knew he needed me to keep playing the role of the supportive partner until his investment deal was officially signed. I reached out, flipped the phone over, and turned on Do Not Disturb mode. The screen went black. Let him sweat, I thought to myself. The Marcus I loved had died the second I read that caption. The man frantically texting me now was nothing but a liability. And in my line of work, when a financial asset turns into a liability, you do not try to fix it, you liquidate it. The heavy wooden door of my hospital room did not just open, it was shoved inward with such violent force that the handle smacked loudly against the drywall. The sudden crash echoed in the quiet room, making my heart race. I turned my head, wincing as the fresh stitches in my abdomen pulled tight. For a split second, I actually thought it was Marcus rushing in, breathless, to beg for my forgiveness. I braced myself for his predictable performance, but the heavy, frantic footsteps stomping across the cold linoleum floor did not belong to him. It was my older brother, DeAndre. And trailing right behind him, looking utterly inconvenienced by the fluorescent hospital lighting, was his white wife, Sarah. There was no soft greeting. There was no gentle inquiry about whether I was in pain or if the surgeons had successfully removed the masses from my uterus. There were no flowers, no balloons, no warm sibling embraces. DeAndre stood at the foot of my bed, his chest heaving under a designer golf polo. He looked terrified, yet he was trying desperately to mask it with misplaced anger. Sarah stood next to him in her pristine athletic wear, her blonde hair perfectly blown out aggressively, sipping a violently green organic kale smoothie from a reusable glass jar. The loud slurping sound she made in the sterile quiet room was like nails on a chalkboard. "What the hell are you doing, Nia?" DeAndre hissed, gripping the plastic footboard of my hospital bed so tightly his knuckles turned pale. I stared at him, the heavy fog of the anesthesia temporarily lifting, replaced by pure, unadulterated confusion. "I have been lying here unconscious for 6 hours, DeAndre. What exactly could I have done?" Sarah let out a dramatic sigh, rolling her eyes as she pulled her metal straw away from her lips. "Oh, please, Nia. Stop playing the victim. We all know you just liked Marcus's picture on Instagram. You are deliberately trying to start a public relations nightmare. And it is honestly so toxic." I blinked, genuinely taken aback by the sheer audacity of her statement. My own brother and my sister-in-law had rushed across the city of Atlanta, not because I had just survived a major surgical procedure, but because my finger had tapped a screen. DeAndre paced to the side of my bed, his face flushed. "Do you have any idea what you are jeopardizing right now? Marcus called me having a full-blown panic attack. He is at a Michelin star restaurant with Chloe and her father, trying to close the final terms of a $15 million venture capital deal. A deal that changes all of our lives. And you are sitting here being petty over a marketing photo. A marketing photo. I repeated the word slowly, letting the sheer disrespect of his statement hang in the air between us. DeAndre, my boyfriend of 4 years, just posted a picture with another woman claiming his life finally feels light while I am bleeding through hospital bandages. He is telling the world he is single and mingling with a billionaire heiress. And you came here to yell at me for liking it. Sarah stepped forward, holding her hand up as if she were a seasoned therapist trying to calm a hysterical patient. Nia, listen to me. You are a strong Black woman. You need to act like one. Do not be the bitter, emotional girlfriend who ruins her successful man's empire because of insecurity. Marcus is navigating a predominantly white financial space. He has to play the game. Chloe's father is old money. He wants to see his daughter with the bright upcoming tech genius. It is just optics, Nia. You need to be the solid foundation supporting him behind the scenes, not throwing digital tantrums. My blood ran ice cold. Sarah loved doing this. She loved using our cultural phrases, weaponizing the concept of the strong Black woman to force me into submission whenever it benefited her and my brother. She loved telling me how to endure disrespect because she thought it made her sound progressive and deeply understanding of our community. In reality, she was just an entitled opportunist who wanted a front row seat to Marcus's incoming wealth. I looked past Sarah's smug face and locked eyes with my brother. DeAndre could not maintain eye contact. He kept shifting his weight, wiping sweat from his forehead. He was too nervous. DeAndre had never cared this much about Marcus's business before. He usually just asked for free VIP passes to whatever tech parties Marcus threw. This level of sheer panic was entirely new. "Why do you care, DeAndre?" I asked, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "Why do you care if Marcus loses this deal? What is in it for you?" DeAndre swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He looked at Sarah for help. Sarah took another obnoxious sip of her green smoothie and crossed her arms over her chest. "Tell her, Dre. We are all adults here. She needs to know the stakes so she stops acting like a child." DeAndre rubbed the back of his neck, his voice trembling slightly. 2 years ago, when Marcus was trying to get his seed money to build the first prototype of the software, he could not get a bank loan. His credit was tied up. He needed $250,000 in cash to secure the server space and hire the front-end developers. I felt a sudden sharp pain in my chest that had absolutely nothing to do with my surgery. Where did he get $250,000? DeAndre? "I gave it to him," DeAndre mumbled, staring at the floor. "You do not have that kind of money. You are a middle school gym teacher." I leveraged Mom's house. The room started to spin. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor attached to my finger suddenly spiked, echoing my internal panic. Our mother's house. The beautiful historic brick home in the West End. The home our late father had literally broken his back to pay off. He worked double shifts at the automotive plant for 30 years, destroying his knees and his lungs, just so our mother would own that property free and clear. It was her sanctuary. It was our family's only true piece of generational wealth. "You did what?" I gasped, trying to sit up, but the agonizing pain in my stomach forced me back down into the pillows. "How could you leverage Mom's house? You are not on the deed." DeAndre finally looked at me, his eyes wide with defensive desperation. "I had her sign the papers. I told her it was a small collateral loan to help me start a sports academy. She did not read the fine print, Naya. She trusts me. I am her only son. I took the loan out, handed the cash to Marcus, and he promised me a massive return on investment once the company went public. If he signs this $15 million deal with Chloe's father on Friday, he buys out my equity. I pay off the bank. Mom never knows a thing, and Sarah and I walk away with $2 million. I stared at the man I had grown up with, completely failing to recognize him. He had risked our widowed mother's entire livelihood, the roof over her head, to fund my boyfriend's startup. And he had lied to do it. But if Marcus does not get this funding, DeAndre continued, his voice cracking, the company goes under. The loan defaults. The bank seizes Mom's house by the end of the year. Sarah stepped right up to the side of my bed, her face devoid of any genuine sympathy. So you see, Nia, you are not just ruining a relationship, you are ruining your own mother. If you make a scene, if you expose Marcus on social media, Chloe's father pulls the term sheet. The deal dies. Your mother becomes homeless. So you are going to pick up your phone. You are going to unlike that picture, and you are going to text Marcus back right now and tell him you are heavily medicated and hit the wrong button. Do you understand me? They had me completely boxed in. They thought they had backed me into a corner where my only option was absolute submission. They expected me to cry, to fold, to sacrifice my pride and my dignity, to save my mother from my brother's catastrophic greed. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the air conditioning unit and the steady beep of my monitor. My mind raced at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I knew the truth that neither DeAndre nor Sarah knew. I knew that Marcus's software, the very product he was using to secure this $15 million deal, was built on an algorithm I had coded. I held 40% hidden equity in that company. But if I blew the whistle right now, if I burned Marcus to the ground tonight, the collateral damage would take my mother down with him. I could not react with emotion. I had to react with strategy. To win this war, I had to make my enemies believe they had already won. I had to make them feel entirely safe. I let out a shaky breath, forcing a tear to well up in the corner of my eye. I let my shoulders slump in defeat. "Hand me my phone," I whispered, making my voice sound as weak and broken as possible. Sarah smiled triumphantly. She reached over to the rolling tray, grabbed my phone, and placed it in my hand. "Good girl," she patronized. "It is for the best." My fingers trembled slightly as I unlocked the screen. I opened the app, navigated to the picture of Marcus and Chloe, and tapped the red heart, removing my like. Then I opened my text messages. Marcus had sent 12 more panicked texts while DeAndre and Sarah were yelling at me. I typed out a reply, slowly, ensuring my brother could see the screen. "I am so sorry, baby. The pain medicine is making me hallucinate and confused." My finger slipped. "I am so proud of you. Close the deal. I love you." I hit send. DeAndre let out a massive, shuddering exhale, wiping the sweat from his face with the back of his hand. "Thank God. Thank you, Nia. I promise, once the deal closes and I get my payout, I will make sure Marcus treats you better. We will all go on a vacation. On me." "Sure, Dre." "A vacation sounds nice," I murmured, closing my eyes and turning my head away from them. "I am really tired now. Please leave." Sarah took one last loud slurp of her smoothie. "Get some rest, Nia. We will come check on you tomorrow." They turned and walked out of the room, pulling the heavy door shut behind them. The click of the latch locking into place echoed in the silence. I opened my eyes and stared at the dark ceiling. The tears I had forced were instantly gone. In their place was a cold, calculating fury. My boyfriend had betrayed my heart, but my brother had betrayed our blood. DeAndre and Sarah thought they had just secured their $2 million payday by forcing me into silence. They thought my mother's house was just a poker chip they had successfully played. They had no idea that I was the one who actually owned the casino. And before this week was over, I was going to bankrupt every single one of them. The heavy hospital door had barely settled into its frame before the profound silence of the room swallowed me whole again. The adrenaline that had surged through my veins during the confrontation with my brother and his wife was slowly beginning to recede, leaving behind a sharp, throbbing ache radiating from my surgical incisions. I adjusted the stiff hospital blanket, trying to find a comfortable position, but my mind was moving too fast for my body to rest. I had just discovered that my own flesh and blood had mortgaged our family legacy to fund the vanity project of a man who was currently toasting to his new life without me. I closed my eyes, taking deep, measured breaths to center myself. I needed to formulate a plan. I needed to figure out exactly how much debt DeAndre had secretly dumped onto our mother's property and how I was going to legally untangle her from Marcus's sinking ship. Suddenly, the harsh vibration of my phone shattered the quiet. It was still sitting face down on the plastic tray table where Sarah had left it. I assumed it was another desperate text from Marcus, or perhaps DeAndre making sure I had not changed my mind about staying silent. I reached over and flipped the device. The screen illuminated the dark room, but it was not a text message. It was an incoming call. The caller ID displayed a formal out-of-state number from New York. For a brief moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. I was exhausted, recovering from major surgery and emotionally drained. But something in my gut, a sharp instinct honed by years of navigating high-stakes corporate mergers and acquisitions, told me to answer it. I cleared my throat, trying to mask the weakness in my voice, and swiped the green icon. "Hello?" I answered, keeping my tone professional and steady. "Good evening, is this Nia Washington?" A crisp, authoritative male voice asked on the other end. Speaking, I replied, my grip tightening slightly on the phone. "Miss Washington, my name is Richard Sterling. I am the senior due diligence attorney representing Vanguard Capital Partners. I apologize for calling so late, but we are finalizing the term sheets for the Series A funding round for your partner's startup, and we have a strict deadline for the morning." Vanguard Capital Partners. The name rang in my ears like a loud bell. That was the venture capital firm owned by Chloe's father, the billionaire who was currently sitting at a Michelin-starred restaurant with Marcus, deciding whether to inject $15 million into his company. I sat up slightly, ignoring the flare of pain in my abdomen. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. How can I help you?" "This is just a routine compliance call, Miss Washington," the lawyer stated in a bored, monotone voice, clearly wanting to check a box and go home. "For our legal records and the protection of the firm's investment, I need to verbally verify the execution of the intellectual property transfer and equity relinquishment agreement." The air in my hospital room suddenly felt freezing cold. I stopped breathing. I stared blankly at the sterile white wall opposite my bed, trying to process the words he had just spoken. "I am sorry," I said, forcing my voice to remain perfectly level. "Could you specify which document you are referring to?" The attorney sighed softly, the sound of papers shuffling echoing through the receiver. "The document signed and notarized by you on Tuesday the 14th. The agreement explicitly stating that you are voluntarily relinquishing your 40% equity stake in the company and transferring all intellectual property rights, including the core risk management algorithm, entirely to Marcus. We just need your verbal confirmation that you signed this document without coercion, as our investors require a clean cap table before distributing the $15 million valuation." My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought the heart monitor would trigger an alarm. Tuesday, the 14th. 2 days ago. 2 days ago, I was sitting in a pre-operative clinic, heavily sedated with anti-anxiety medication, preparing my body to be cut open. I had not signed a single piece of paper related to Marcus's business in over a year. The ultimate betrayal did not happen on social media. It was not the picture of him smiling with Chloe. It was not the cruel caption. Marcus had forged my signature. He had forged my signature on a legally binding corporate document to steal my life's work. The algorithm that secured him this meeting with Vanguard Capital was not his. Marcus was a charismatic salesman, a pitchman who knew how to wear a tailored suit and use corporate buzzwords. He did not know the first thing about predictive financial modeling. I spent 2 years of my life sitting up until 3 in the morning writing every single line of that code. I built the architecture. I ran the stress tests. I created the product that made his company valuable. I was the silent partner. I stayed in the shadows because Marcus insisted that investors wanted to see a strong, solo male founder at the helm. He promised me that my 40% equity was safe, that we were building an empire together. But Chloe's father was an old money billionaire. He was not going to hand $15 million to a young black entrepreneur whose ex-girlfriend held nearly half the company and the rights to the core technology. To marry into that family, to secure that massive bag of wealth, Marcus had to present himself as the sole visionary. He needed a clean company. He needed me completely erased from the narrative. So he stole it. He committed federal wire fraud and forgery to rob me blind. Miss Washington, are you still there? The lawyer's impatient voice broke through the deafening roar of my own thoughts. I closed my eyes. A normal reaction would be to scream. A normal reaction would be to tell this high-powered attorney that the document was a fraudulent fake, that Marcus was a criminal, and that Vanguard Capital was about to invest millions of dollars into a stolen product. If I said those words right now, the deal would collapse instantly. Marcus would be destroyed before dessert was even served at his fancy dinner. But if I blew up the deal tonight, DeAndre's secret loan would default tomorrow. The bank would move to seize my mother's home by the end of the month. My brother had foolishly tied my family's survival directly to Marcus's success. I could not sink Marcus's ship without drowning my own mother in the process. I needed this $15 million deal to go through. I needed Marcus to think he had won. I needed Chloe's father to wire that money into the company accounts. Because once the money was there, and once I secured my mother's property, I was going to take it all. Yes, Mr. Sterling, I am still here. I said, my voice eerily calm, smooth as glass. Excellent. Can you confirm for the recorded line that you willingly signed the equity relinquishment and IP transfer agreement on Tuesday the 14th? I opened my eyes and stared at the dark window, seeing my own pale reflection in the glass. Yes, I can confirm that I signed the agreement. The intellectual property is fully transferred. Thank you, Miss Washington. We appreciate your cooperation. Have a wonderful evening. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone to my lap. The hospital room was completely silent once more, but the energy inside it had fundamentally shifted. I was no longer a grieving girlfriend dealing with a toxic breakup. I was no longer a victim crying over a disrespectful social media post. Marcus had just handed me the keys to his complete destruction. By forging my signature on a document submitted to a federal financial institution, he had committed a massive felony. He thought he was playing a game of chess, sacrificing a pawn to protect his king. He did not realize he was playing against the person who owned the entire board. He wanted to be the sole visionary. He wanted the $15 million. He wanted the billionaire lifestyle with his new heiress. I was going to let him have it. I was going to let him sign the contracts, pop the expensive champagne, and stand on the highest pedestal he could find. Because the higher he climbed, the more bones he was going to break when I finally pushed him off. The glow of the phone screen faded into blackness, plunging the hospital room back into shadows. I sat there in the quiet, the weight of what I had just set into motion settling heavily over my chest. I had just verbally authorized the theft of my own intellectual property. I had just handed a $15 million golden ticket to the man who betrayed me and the brother who sold out our mother. A lesser woman would have been paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of that loss. But as I leaned back against the stiff pillows, a strange cold smile crept across my face. I embraced the sharp pain radiating from my surgical incisions. The physical agony was a perfect anchor. It kept me grounded, hyper-focused, and completely detached from the emotional wreckage of my 4-year relationship. For years, I had played the role that society and my own family had assigned to me. I was the reliable, invisible foundation. I was the woman who worked 70-hour weeks at a corporate firm only to come home and write code until dawn so my boyfriend could chase his Silicon Valley dreams. I was the dutiful daughter and sister who never caused a scene. I had swallowed my own ambition to make room for Marcus and his massive ego. I had listened to Sarah preach about how Black women need to uplift their men even when those men are standing squarely on our necks. But that version of Nia died on this hospital bed tonight. I was done being the silent mule for everyone else's financial elevation. If Marcus wanted to play a high-stakes game of corporate espionage and fraud, I was going to show him what a real mastermind looked like. I carefully shifted my weight, fighting through a wave of nausea, and reached for the leather tote bag sitting on the visitor chair next to my bed. My fingers brushed against the familiar cold metal of my tablet. I pulled it onto my lap, the screen illuminating my face with a harsh blue light. I ignored the fatigue pulling at my eyelids. I had work to do, and the window of opportunity was rapidly closing. Marcus thought he was a tech genius because he knew how to pitch an app to a room full of wealthy investors. But he did not know the first thing about back-end security. He was a charismatic salesman wearing a founder's suit. I was the architect, and an architect always knows the structural weaknesses of the building she designed. I connected to the secure hospital network and quickly activated my encrypted virtual private network. My fingers flew across the digital keyboard, muscle memory taking over despite the heavy painkillers coursing through my system. I bypassed the standard login portal for Marcus's startup. He had likely locked me out of my official company email and standard administrator accounts the moment he posted that picture with Chloe. He thought changing a few passwords would keep his secrets safe. He vastly underestimated my foresight and my intelligence. When I built the core algorithm 2 years ago, I embedded a hidden backdoor access protocol deep within the root directory. It was a failsafe I designed purely for emergency maintenance, hidden under strings of code that looked like routine server diagnostic logs. Marcus never knew it existed because Marcus could not read code if his life depended on it. I typed in the command prompt and hit enter. The screen flashed black, then green, and within seconds I was entirely inside the company's central mainframe. I had unrestricted invisible access to everything: the financial records, the internal communications, the investor cap tables, and most importantly, the digital footprint of every single document ever created or modified on the server. My eyes scanned the directories with ruthless efficiency. I bypassed the marketing folders and the pitch decks. I went straight for the legal and compliance archives. It took me less than 3 minutes to find exactly what I was looking for. There it was, a file labeled IP Transfer and Equity Relinquishment Final. I opened the document. Seeing it with my own eyes was a visceral shock, even though I already knew what it contained. There was my forged signature rendered perfectly at the bottom of the page, waiving my rights to my algorithm and my 40% stake in the company. Beside it was the digital stamp of a notary public. Marcus had either bribed someone or found a corrupt notary willing to rubber stamp a fraudulent document without the signatory present. But Marcus was sloppy. He was so focused on the prize that he forgot how digital ecosystems actually work. He thought saving a digital document was the end of the trail. He did not realize that the server automatically recorded the exact Internet Protocol address, the device media access control address, and the precise timestamp of the user who generated and uploaded the file. I pulled the back-end server logs. The data told a flawless, undeniable story. The forged document was created on Marcus's personal laptop connected to his home wireless network at 2 a.m. on Tuesday, the exact same time I was heavily medicated in a pre-operative hospital suite across town. I did not stop there. I needed to understand exactly how much of my mother's money DeAndre had funneled into this sinking ship and where those funds had actually gone. I accessed the company's central accounting ledgers. As I scrolled through the line items, the depth of Marcus's financial mismanagement made my stomach turn. DeAndre had handed him $250,000 of our mother's home equity. That money was supposed to be strictly allocated for server space data security and hiring front-end developers. Instead, the ledger showed a trail of blatant vanity expenses. Marcus had spent tens of thousands of dollars on a luxury public relations firm to secure him interviews in tech magazines. He had leased a high-end sports car under the company name. He had expense designer suits, private club memberships, and lavish dinners. He was bleeding the company dry to maintain the illusion of overwhelming success, hoping the $15 million Vanguard capital injection would arrive before the entire house of cards collapsed. He had essentially turned my brother's illegal loan into his personal piggy bank. I initiated a mass download. I pulled the forged legal documents, the raw server logs proving his fraud, the compromised accounting ledgers, and the complete source code of my algorithm. I encrypted the massive data packet and routed it directly to a secure, decentralized cloud server that only I controlled. I watched the progress bar inch across the screen: 10%, 40%, 80%, complete. The evidence of his federal crimes was now safely locked away in my digital vault. He had forged documents to defraud an investor. He had misappropriated funds. He was operating a fraudulent enterprise. The sheer volume of federal laws he had broken could put him in prison for a decade. I closed the connection, wiping my access logs clean, so he would never know I had been inside the system. I turned off the tablet and slid it back into my tote bag. The trap was officially set, loaded, and waiting for him to step right into it. Marcus was currently celebrating his genius, convinced he had outsmarted his sick girlfriend and secured his billionaire future. My brother was likely sleeping soundly, dreaming of his impending payout. They thought they had buried me under the weight of their ambition, but they forgot that seeds grow best in the dark. I thought about Chloe for a moment. The beautiful, wealthy, 25-year-old heiress smiling in that photograph. A part of me almost felt sorry for her. She thought she was dating a brilliant tech visionary. She thought she was standing beside a man who was building the future. She had no idea she was simply the final stepping stone in a long con, a shiny key meant to unlock her father's vault. Marcus did not love her any more than he loved me. He loved the $15 million she represented. He loved the access to the elite, untouchable world of old money. Chloe was just collateral damage in his pursuit of power. And while I had no intention of saving her, I knew her father was not a man who took kindly to being swindled. When I eventually handed Vanguard Capital this digital dossier, they would not just walk away from the deal, they would destroy Marcus professionally and legally. But that destruction had to happen on my exact timeline. If I pulled the trigger now, Vanguard Capital would freeze the deal. Marcus would go bankrupt instantly, and my mother's house would be seized by the bank before the end of the month. DeAndre had made sure our family's survival was chained to Marcus's success. So I had to let Marcus succeed. I had to let Vanguard Capital wire the $15 million into the corporate accounts. Once the company was flush with cash, I could execute my strategy to extract my mother's stolen equity, reclaim my intellectual property, and leave Marcus holding an empty bag while the federal investigators closed in. The pain medication was finally starting to pull me under, a heavy warm wave washing over my exhausted body. But for the first time since waking up in this stark white room, my mind was entirely at peace. The tears I never cried were replaced by a sharp, lethal clarity. I had the data. I had the timeline. I had the immense leverage. Marcus wanted a light life. I was going to give him a masterclass in how heavy the truth could be. I closed my eyes, letting a genuine smile touch my lips in the darkness. Let them celebrate tonight. Let them toast to their victory. Because tomorrow, the architect was coming to tear the building down. The harsh morning sunlight finally pierced through the thin hospital blinds, replacing the cold shadows of the night with a blinding, sterile glare. I had barely slept, my mind buzzing with lines of code, financial ledgers, and the precise timeline of my impending revenge. Right around 9 o'clock, the heavy wooden door of my room slowly swung open. I did not have to look up to know who it was. The overwhelming scent of expensive Tom Ford cologne entered the room before he did, completely masking the medicinal smell of the hospital. Marcus stepped into the room. He did not look like a man who had spent a sleepless night agonizing over his sick, hospitalized girlfriend. He looked like a man who had just conquered the financial world and stopped by for a mandatory public relations appearance. He was wearing a meticulously tailored charcoal gray suit, a crisp white shirt unbuttoned perfectly at the collar, and his signature gold watch gleaming on his wrist. In his hands, he carried a massive, ostentatious bouquet of 24 long-stemmed red velvet roses. They were the kind of roses you buy for a romantic anniversary dinner, not for a woman recovering from having tumors surgically removed from her uterus. He stood over my bed, his broad shoulders blocking the morning light, casting a long, dominant shadow across my fragile state. From anyone else's perspective, he looked like the picture-perfect caring partner arriving to comfort his ailing love. But from where I was lying looking up at him, the power dynamic he was trying to establish was blatantly obvious. He wanted to loom over me. He wanted to feel large and in charge while I was confined to a hospital bed, physically weak and attached to intravenous lines. "Oh, baby, I am so sorry," he murmured, his voice thick with rehearsed emotion. He set the ridiculously large bouquet of roses on the rolling tray table, completely knocking over my plastic cup of ice water in the process. He did not even notice the spill. He immediately dropped to his knees beside the bed, bringing his face level with mine, and took both of my hands in his. His palms were warm and smooth, completely devoid of the calluses my father used to have. I looked into his eyes, waiting for the performance to begin, and Marcus did not disappoint. "I came as soon as I could," he whispered, his brow furrowing in a picture of perfect anguish. The dinner ran incredibly late, and then Chloe's father insisted on a breakfast meeting this morning to review the final term sheets. "Nia, you have to understand, I was dying inside the entire time. Every second I was sitting at that table, all I could think about was you lying here in pain." I kept my face perfectly neutral, allowing my silence to draw him out further. When a narcissist feels like they are losing their grip on their audience, they will always overcompensate with grander, more elaborate lies. He squeezed my hands tightly, shaking his head as if he carried the weight of the entire world on his shoulders. "That picture, that stupid, meaningless picture, you have to know that was not my idea. Vanguard Capital has an entire team of public relations sharks, Nia. They dictate everything. They told me that if they are going to inject $15 million into this company, they need a specific narrative. They want a young, vibrant, highly eligible founder. They want the optics of a tech visionary mingling with high society." He stood up, suddenly restless, pacing the short distance between my bed and the window. He was warming up to his favorite subject: himself. "Do you have any idea how hard it is for a black man to get a seat at the table in this industry?" he demanded, his voice rising with theatrical passion. "The system is entirely rigged against us, Nia. White founders can walk into a venture capital firm wearing a hoodie and flip-flops with a half-baked idea, and they walk out with $20 million. But me, I have to wear a $3,000 suit. I have to speak perfectly. I have to play their ridiculous games. And part of that game is Chloe." He stopped pacing and turned back to look at me, placing his hand over his heart. "Her father is an old money billionaire. He does not respect self-made men from Atlanta, but he worships his spoiled daughter. If she likes me, he funds me. That is the only reason I was smiling in that photograph. That caption about life feeling light, that was literally drafted by their marketing director to make it look like I am unburdened and ready to lead a massive corporation. It was business, Nia. Pure, ugly business. You know I would never intentionally disrespect you like that." I lay there watching this man deliver an Oscar-worthy monologue about systemic oppression and corporate sacrifice. It was actually breathtaking how effortlessly he manipulated the truth. He was using the very real struggles of Black entrepreneurs to justify his own narcissistic greed and infidelity. He was painting himself as a brave martyr who was forced to dine at Michelin-starred restaurants and romance a billionaire heiress, all for the greater good of our future. While he was speaking, all I could think about was the digital dossier currently sitting on my encrypted server. I thought about the forged legal document transferring my 40% equity into his name. I thought about the thousands of dollars of my mother's stolen home equity that he had blown on sports cars and private clubs. He was standing here demanding my sympathy for the heavy burden he carried while he was actively burying a knife so deeply into my back that it was piercing my family's foundation. But I could not let the anger show. If I challenged him now, if I called him a liar and threw his forged documents in his face, the Vanguard Capital deal would implode immediately. He would not get the $15 million. And if he did not get that money, my brother would default on the loan and my mother would lose her home. I needed Marcus to feel completely victorious. I needed him to believe that his silver tongue had worked flawlessly so he would confidently sign those final investment papers on Friday. I let out a soft, trembling sigh. I relaxed my facial muscles, letting my eyes widen slightly to project vulnerability and exhaustion. I forced a single perfect tear to well up in the corner of my eye and slide down my cheek. "It just hurts so much, Marcus," I whispered, making my voice sound incredibly small and fragile. I woke up from the surgery and I was in so much pain, and the first thing I saw was you looking so happy with someone else. I felt so disposable. Marcus rushed back to the side of the bed, his face instantly softening into a mask of overwhelming relief. He thought he had me. He thought the crisis was averted. "You are never disposable, Nia," he said fiercely, reaching out to gently wipe the tear from my cheek. "You are my rock. You are the woman who held me down when I had nothing. I am doing all of this for us, for our future. Once this 15 million hits the bank account, the company is secure. I can finally buy out the early investors, I can get rid of Chloe, and we can start building the life we actually deserve. I just need you to hold on a little longer. I need you to trust me." I looked up at him, letting my expression melt into one of absolute naive devotion. I slowly reached my arms up toward him. He immediately leaned down over the bed, wrapping his arms around my shoulders and pulling me into a tight, secure embrace. He buried his face in my neck, letting out a heavy sigh of triumph. As he held me, my chin rested comfortably over his shoulder. Directly across the room, mounted on the wall above the sink, was a rectangular hospital mirror. I opened my eyes and looked straight into the reflection. In the mirror, I could clearly see the back of my own head, and I could see Marcus's face resting over my shoulder. He could not see my expression, but the mirror caught his perfectly. The mask of the tortured, loving boyfriend had completely vanished. In its place was a chilling, arrogant smirk. It was the smile of a predator who had just successfully cornered his prey. He was grinning from ear to ear, practically glowing with the satisfaction of knowing he had manipulated his sick girlfriend into silent compliance. He thought I was blind, weak, and entirely under his control. I kept my arms securely wrapped around his waist. I stared at his smiling reflection in the glass, but my own eyes were entirely dead. There was no warmth, no love, no sorrow left in them. They were cold, calculating, and ruthlessly empty. I looked like a stranger trapped inside my own body. "I trust you, Marcus," I whispered softly into his ear, my voice gentle and sweet. His smirk grew wider in the mirror. "I love you, Nia," he whispered back. I continued to stare at my dead eyes in the reflection, matching his physical embrace, while my mind locked the final pieces of his execution into place. He thought he was holding a devoted woman who had finally accepted her place in the shadows. He had absolutely no idea he was embracing a loaded gun. And by the time the gala arrived this weekend, I was going to pull the trigger with a smile on my face. 3 weeks later, the rich, familiar scent of roasted turkey, smoked collard greens, and candied yams filled the air of my mother's historic West End home. It was Thanksgiving Day, a holiday traditionally meant for gratitude, reflection, and family unity. But as I sat at the center of the long mahogany dining table, carefully adjusting my posture to accommodate my healing surgical incisions, I felt like I was attending a high-stakes masquerade ball. If someone were to glide a camera down the length of that beautifully decorated table, they would capture a flawless masterpiece of fake smiles, forced laughter, and heavy underlying tension. At the head of the table sat Marcus. He was not a member of this family by blood or by marriage, but he had comfortably positioned himself in my late father's heavy oak chair. He wore a plush cashmere sweater, holding a crystal glass of expensive bourbon, basking in the absolute adoration of my family. He looked every bit the triumphant tech founder holding court and soaking up the praise like a sponge. To his right sat my brother DeAndre, eagerly nodding at every single word Marcus said, looking less like an older brother and more like an over-eager intern trying to impress a billionaire boss. Next to DeAndre was his wife Sarah. She had brought 3 bottles of a highly obscure, expensive organic wine that nobody asked for, and she was already halfway through her second glass. She wore a perfectly pressed autumn dress, constantly adjusting her posture to ensure everyone noticed her designer jewelry. And then there was my mother. She sat directly across from me, her hair perfectly styled, wearing her Sunday best pearls. Her eyes were practically shining with pride, but that pride was entirely directed at the man who had secretly forged my signature and stolen my life's work. Marcus. This turkey would be absolutely nothing without someone carving it properly, my mother beamed, passing him a large silver serving platter. You are the man of the house today. Please do the honors. Marcus offered a painfully humble smile, taking the carving knife. It is an honor, Mama. You know I always look forward to your cooking. It is the only thing that keeps me grounded in the middle of all this corporate chaos. DeAndre raised his glass of wine. Let us make a toast. To Marcus. In just 48 hours, he is going to sign a $15 million term sheet with Vanguard Capital. He is going to put our entire family on the map. To the future tech king of Atlanta. Hear, hear. Sarah chimed in loudly, clinking her glass against DeAndre's. I quietly raised my glass of sparkling cider, keeping my eyes cast downward. I took a small sip, letting the sweet liquid coat my dry throat. I had spent the last 3 weeks meticulously organizing the stolen server data, quietly moving my own finances into position, and playing the role of the devoted, recovering girlfriend perfectly. Marcus called me every night, treating me like a fragile porcelain doll, assuring me that the Chloe situation was purely a business transaction. I smiled, I agreed, and I waited. But sitting here at this table, watching my own family worship the man who was actively destroying us, tested every single ounce of my self-control. Nia, you need to fix your face, my mother suddenly said, her voice cutting through the cheerful chatter. I looked up, feigning innocent confusion. Excuse me. You have been sitting there moping over your plate since we sat down. She continued, setting her fork down with a sharp clink against the fine china. I know the surgery took a lot out of you, but you need to show some enthusiasm. Your man is about to change the trajectory of his entire life. You should be beaming. I am happy for him, Mom, I said softly. I am just still a bit tired. My mother let out a long, disappointed sigh. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, fixing me with a stern, generational glare. Let me tell you something about the real world, Nia. A man like Marcus is a prize. When a black man is successfully climbing to the top of the financial ladder, there will always be distractions. There will always be little wealthy girls like that Chloe woman trying to attach themselves to his success. It is the nature of the world. I felt my heart rate spike, but I kept my hands perfectly still in my lap. She was actually defending him. She was defending the public humiliation I had endured. Do you think your father did not have women circling him when he finally got his managerial promotion at the automotive plant? She demanded, her voice carrying the heavy weight of a woman who had compromised her entire life for the sake of appearances. You endure it. You smile. You protect your position. Because at the end of the day, he is sitting at your Thanksgiving table, not hers. Do not let a bruised ego and a little bit of insecurity ruin your financial security. You need to be the strong anchor he comes back to. Sarah aggressively nodded in agreement, pointing her wine glass at me across the table. Exactly, Nia. You have to look at the bigger picture. We are all making massive sacrifices right now to ensure this company takes off. Do you have any idea how much stress DeAndre has been under? Putting $500,000 on the line is no joke. It takes a massive toll on a marriage. The entire dining room went completely terrifyingly silent. The only sound left in the room was the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Marcus stopped carving the turkey, the silver knife frozen midair. DeAndre looked like he had just been struck by a bolt of lightning. His face drained of all color, his eyes widening in absolute horror as he stared at his wife. I slowly set my glass down on the table. I looked directly at DeAndre, keeping my voice carefully neutral, void of the explosive anger boiling inside me. $500,000. I thought you told me in the hospital that the loan against the house was for $250,000. DeAndre opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He began to cough awkwardly, reaching for his water glass with a trembling hand. Sarah suddenly realized what she had done. The alcohol-induced confidence vanished from her face, replaced by a frantic, nervous energy. She looked at DeAndre, then at Marcus, realizing she had just exposed a massive secret. But instead of apologizing or staying quiet, Sarah did what she always did when backed into a corner. She doubled down and tried to rationalize her mistake with corporate buzzwords. "Well, I mean, the initial loan was for $250,000, Sarah stammered, waving her hand dismissively, as if we were discussing the price of groceries. That was just for the software development and the server space. But then Marcus realized he needed to aggressively boost his public profile to attract a firm like Vanguard Capital. You know how it is in the tech world. It is all about the optics. My mother looked confused, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean optics, Sarah? What is a second loan?" Sarah let out a nervous laugh, desperate to regain control of the narrative. "It is just business strategy, Vivian. Marcus needed the Forbes magazine feature. He needed to lease the luxury vehicles to pull up to the investor meetings, so he looked the part. He needed to keep a high-end public relations firm on retainer to manage the press. So DeAndre had to go back to the bank and take out a second line of credit against your house to fund the marketing push. You have to spend money to make money, right?" It was an aggressive growth strategy. I stared at Sarah, the sheer magnitude of her words crashing over me like a tidal wave. They had not just leveraged my mother's house, they had completely drained it. The property was underwater. Every single brick of the home my father bled for had been handed to the bank so Marcus could lease a luxury car, buy tailored suits, and pay a PR firm to write a fake caption about his life, feeling light with another woman. DeAndre had risked our mother facing total bankruptcy and eviction just so Marcus could pretend to be rich before he actually was. Marcus quickly set the carving knife down and cleared his throat, plastering on his most charming, reassuring smile. He looked directly at my mother. "Mama, please do not worry. It sounds a lot scarier than it is. It was a short-term bridge loan. DeAndre and I made the executive decision to secure the necessary marketing funds to guarantee this Vanguard deal, and it worked perfectly. As soon as I sign the papers on Friday, the very first wire transfer I make will be to pay off your house in full with interest. You have my absolute word as a man." My mother, completely blind to the financial peril she was currently sitting in, let out a relieved sigh and smiled back at him. "Well, I trust you, Marcus. I know you boys are doing what is best for the family. Business is business." I looked at the four of them. They were a perfect ecosystem of toxicity. The narcissist, the enabler, the greedy brother, and the oblivious victim. A surge of pure adrenaline shot through my veins, sharpening my focus to a razor edge. I could not explode. I could not flip the table. If I caused a scene right now, they would close ranks, panic, and potentially jeopardize the Vanguard deal. I needed that $15 million to hit the account. So I did exactly what my mother advised me to do. I fixed my face. I let a look of absolute awe and admiration wash over my features. I looked at DeAndre, then at Marcus, and finally at Sarah. "Wow," I said softly, injecting pure wonder into my tone. "I had no idea you guys believed in him that much. $500,000. That is incredible trust. You really put everything on the line for this dream. DeAndre let out a massive breath, his shoulders dropping in relief. He thought I was impressed. We are a team, Nia. We do what it takes to win. Marcus smirked, picking the carving knife back up. See, baby, I told you. I have everything under control. Now who wants the first slice of turkey? I smiled warmly at him, my heart perfectly cold. I do, Marcus. Thank you. As he placed the meat on my plate, I casually reached my left hand under the heavy tablecloth. My fingers found the sleek edge of my smartwatch. With a subtle, practiced motion, I tapped the screen twice. The tiny red recording icon illuminated in the dark. If Sarah was ready to start spilling the exact financial details of their illegal loans, I was more than happy to let them document their own federal crimes while we ate dessert. The tiny red recording icon pulsed like a quiet heartbeat against my wrist, hidden beneath the heavy linen tablecloth. I rested my hand comfortably on my lap, ensuring the microphone was perfectly positioned to capture every single word spoken in the dining room. I looked up from my plate and directed my attention to my brother, keeping my face a picture of absolute wide-eyed innocence. I am just trying to wrap my head around the sheer scale of it, I said, keeping my tone light and overflowing with manufactured awe as I picked up my fork. $500,000. That is a massive amount of capital to secure so quickly, especially in this economic climate. DeAndre, how did you even get the bank to approve a second lien on Mom's house without triggering a massive financial audit? You must have an incredible relationship with the loan officers to pull off something so complex. DeAndre puffed out his chest completely, unable to resist the validation. The fear that had gripped him just moments ago evaporated, replaced by the arrogant swagger of a man who truly believed he was the smartest person in the room. He took a long sip of his wine, leaning back in his chair with a smug smile. It is all about understanding the system and controlling the narrative, Nia. DeAndre boasted, his voice loud and confident. The banks do not care about the truth, they only care about the paperwork. When I went back for the second round of funding, I knew they would flag a massive cash withdrawal if I said it was for a tech startup that was not generating revenue yet. So I set up a dummy limited liability company, registered as a residential construction firm. I told the bank we were doing a complete luxury historic renovation on Mom's property to drastically increase the resale value. My mother looked up from her plate, her brow furrowing slightly. A renovation? But DeAndre, we have not touched a single brick on this house. DeAndre waved his hand dismissively, letting out a condescending chuckle. I know that, Mom. That is the beauty of it. It was just a paper trail. I had you sign those stacks of property tax addendums last month, remember? I slipped the loan authorization papers right in the middle of the stack. You hate reading legal jargon, so you just signed where the sticky notes told you to. The bank got their authorized signature from the property owner, and they released the funds directly into my dummy construction account. From there, I just quietly wired the cash over to Marcus. I sat perfectly still, my heart pounding a steady, lethal rhythm against my ribs. DeAndre had just confessed into a high-definition digital microphone to establishing a fraudulent shell company committing mortgage fraud and deliberately deceiving an elderly family member to misappropriate funds. It was a textbook federal crime, and he was bragging about it over Thanksgiving turkey. But Marcus was not about to let DeAndre take all the credit for their criminal enterprise. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, eager to showcase his own brilliant maneuvering. Well, it was not quite that simple, Marcus interjected, pointing his fork at my brother. You got the cash out, but we had to justify the inflated loan amount to the underwriters. Mom's house is nice, but it is not worth $500,000 on paper without a little help. I tilted my head, looking at Marcus with fake fascination. How did you manage that? The city appraisers are usually incredibly strict in this neighborhood. Marcus let out a deep, arrogant laugh. They are strict if you use the ones assigned by the state. But I have a guy I went to college with who runs an independent commercial appraisal firm. I paid him a $10,000 consulting fee out of the first loan. In exchange, he drafted a highly aggressive, completely speculative property valuation based on projected gentrification for the next 10 years. He basically stamped a document saying this house would be worth $1 million by next summer. We submitted his independent appraisal to the bank, and they rubber stamped the loan expansion without ever sending a physical inspector to the property. I slowly chewed a piece of candied yam, forcing myself to swallow, while my stomach churned with disgust. Marcus had just casually admitted to bribing a licensed appraiser and committing bank fraud to secure a loan he had absolutely no intention of using for its stated purpose. He had orchestrated the entire financial scam, using my foolish brother as the frontman to absorb all the legal liability. "And what about the invoices?" I asked, keeping my voice soft and encouraging. "If the bank thought you were doing a luxury renovation, wouldn't they want to see receipts for the construction materials?" Sarah aggressively cut a piece of turkey on her plate, eager to jump into the conversation and prove she was part of the mastermind team. "Oh, I handled that part," she chimed in proudly. "I used an online graphic design tool to mock up fake invoices from luxury lumber yards and high-end appliance distributors. I just generated fake order numbers and marked them as paid in full." We submitted the PDF files to the bank's digital portal, and their automated system cleared the compliance checks within 24 hours. It was honestly ridiculously easy. These financial institutions are so archaic, they practically beg smart people to outsmart them. I reached for my glass of sparkling cider and took a long sip to hide the sharp predatory smile fighting to break across my face. It was the holy trinity of financial crimes. DeAndre had committed wire fraud and elder abuse. Marcus had committed bribery and bank fraud. Sarah had committed document forgery to satisfy federal lending regulations. And my Apple Watch was capturing every single crystal clear syllable of their confessions. They were handing me the exact ammunition I needed to bury them all under a mountain of federal indictments. "That is truly incredible," I said, setting my glass down and looking around the table with wide eyes. "You guys built a flawless system. No wonder Vanguard Capital is so eager to get into business with you, Marcus. You clearly know how to navigate the financial world." Marcus beamed his chest, puffing out with absolute pride. "It is all about playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers, baby. Which actually brings me to the most important part of the week." He clapped his hands together, shifting the energy at the table from conspiratorial bragging to celebratory anticipation. "As you all know, the Vanguard Capital Gala is this Saturday night at the Four Seasons downtown. It is going to be the biggest event of the year. Every major venture capitalist, tech journalist, and angel investor in Atlanta is going to be there. At exactly 9 o'clock, Chloe's father is going to call me up to the main stage, and we are going to officially sign the $15 million term sheet in front of the press." DeAndre raised his wine glass in the air, his eyes shining with greedy excitement. "And then the wire transfer hits the account on Monday morning. We are going to be rich." Sarah clapped her hands, her designer bracelets jingling loudly. "I already bought my dress. It is a stunning emerald green silk gown. We are going to look amazing in the VIP section." Marcus smiled at them, acknowledging their excitement, but then he turned his attention back to me. His smile softened, transforming into a mask of deep manufactured concern. He reached across the table and gently placed his hand over mine. "Naya, baby, I have been thinking about Saturday night a lot," he began, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "And I really think you should sit this one out." The entire table went quiet. My mother stopped eating and looked at Marcus, then at me. I kept my hand perfectly still under his grip, maintaining my expression of innocent confusion. "Sit it out," I asked quietly. "But Marcus, this is the biggest night of your life. I have been with you since the very beginning. I want to be there to see you sign those papers." Marcus let out a heavy sigh, gently squeezing my fingers. "I know you do, sweetheart. And it breaks my heart that you cannot be by my side. But you have to look at the reality of the situation. You are still recovering from a major surgical procedure. You are barely eating. You look exhausted just sitting here at the dinner table. The gala is going to be a chaotic madhouse. There will be hundreds of people flashing cameras, and you would have to stand in high heels for hours." I absolutely refuse to let you jeopardize your physical health just to stand in the background. Sarah immediately jumped in to assist him, her tone thick with condescension. Marcus is completely right, Nia. You really do not look well. You are so pale. Plus, Chloe and her father are hosting the entire event. Given the whole public relations narrative about Marcus and Chloe being the new power couple, it might be incredibly awkward for everyone if you are standing there looking sick and fragile. You know how important the optics are for this deal. You do not want to be a distraction. DeAndre nodded in agreement, his mouth full of food. Yeah, Nia. Just stay home and watch the live stream. We will bring you some leftover champagne. They were not even trying to hide their true motives anymore. They were actively erasing me from the narrative, sweeping me under the rug so Marcus could parade around with his billionaire heiress, without his sick, inconvenient girlfriend, ruining the aesthetic of his big night. They thought they were being so smooth, so manipulative. They thought they were expertly managing a fragile, broken woman. I looked down at our joined hands on the table, letting a long, dramatic pause fill the room. I took a deep breath, making my shoulders slump in total defeat. When I finally looked back up at Marcus, my eyes were soft, compliant, and completely yielding. You know what, Marcus? I whispered, offering him a sweet, fragile smile. You are absolutely right. I am still feeling pretty weak, and the last thing I want to do is slow you down or ruin your optics on such an important night. You should go. Go shine. Go secure our future. I will stay home and rest. The collective wave of relief that washed over the dining room was almost palpable. Marcus let out a huge breath, a genuine smile of victory breaking across his face. He lifted my hand and kissed my knuckles. That is my girl, always so understanding, always putting us first. I promise you, Naya, after Saturday night, everything changes for us. I slowly pulled my hand away from his grasp and placed it back on my lap, my fingertips brushing against the cool glass of my smartwatch. The tiny red icon was still pulsing steadily in the dark. I know it will, Marcus. I replied, my voice perfectly sweet and even. I know everything is going to change. The villains laughed, raised their glasses, and continued to eat their Thanksgiving dinner, completely dropping their guard. They celebrated their impending wealth, completely unaware that the woman sitting quietly at the table had just locked the doors, poured the gasoline, and was simply waiting for Saturday night to strike the match. The very next morning, while Marcus and my family genuinely believed I was confined to my bed in Atlanta, nursing my surgical wounds and a broken heart, I was stepping out of a black town car in the heart of the financial district. The morning air was crisp and biting, but I did not feel the cold. I looked down at my feet. A camera would have captured a perfect low-angle tracking shot following the sharp, rhythmic click of my 5-inch crimson-red Louboutin heels striking the pristine concrete. Each step was a deliberate, powerful strike against the pavement, a stark contrast to the fragile, defeated woman I had pretended to be at the Thanksgiving table just 12 hours prior. I walked straight through the towering glass revolving doors of a massive, imposing Wall Street skyscraper. This was the global headquarters of Pinnacle Apex Capital, the most ruthless, aggressive venture capital firm on the East Coast, and the absolute biggest industry rival to Vanguard Capital. Vanguard Capital, owned by Chloe's father, was known for flashy investments, high society networking, and throwing lavish parties to celebrate their acquisitions. Pinnacle Apex, on the other hand, was a completely different beast. They were known for corporate raiding hostile takeovers and burying their competition with clinical precision. At the top of this financial food chain was the chairman and chief executive officer, Elias Thorne. Elias was a legendary titan in the financial sector, a self-made billionaire who did not care about optics, social media influencers, or public relations. He cared about raw data, ruthless efficiency, and total market domination. Getting a face-to-face meeting with him was practically impossible for a normal person. But when you are a senior mergers and acquisitions advisor who knows exactly how to phrase an urgent, highly confidential proposition regarding his biggest competitor's impending flagship investment doors tend to open very quickly. I bypassed the massive marble reception desk, guided by an executive assistant through a maze of frosted glass corridors until we reached the corner office at the very top of the tower. The heavy oak doors swung open. Elias Thorne sat behind a massive desk carved from a single piece of black marble. He was an older, fiercely intimidating man, with sharp, calculating eyes that immediately sized me up as I entered. He did not stand up to greet me. He simply gestured to the leather chair opposite him, keeping his expression entirely unreadable. Nia Washington. Elias said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that effortlessly commanded the massive room. Your email was incredibly bold. You claimed you have irrefutable information that could save my firm from making a catastrophic counteroffer on a rising tech startup, while simultaneously giving me the leverage to publicly humiliate my biggest rival. You have exactly 5 minutes to prove you are not wasting my time. I did not blink. I did not shrink under his intense, predatory gaze. I sat down elegantly, crossed my legs, and placed my encrypted tablet on the cold marble surface of his desk. I do not need 5 minutes, Mr. Thorne, I replied, my voice steady, professional, and completely devoid of any intimidation. I only need 3. I unlocked the tablet and slid it across the expansive desk toward him. Tomorrow night, Vanguard Capital is preparing to sign a $15 million Series A term sheet with a fintech startup based in Atlanta. They believe they are investing in a revolutionary risk management algorithm that can predict market volatility with unprecedented accuracy. They also believe the founder, Marcus, is a brilliant self-taught visionary who owns 100% of the intellectual property. Elias leaned forward, his eyes locked on the glowing screen of the tablet. I am fully aware of the deal. My senior analysts have actually been considering stepping in with an $18 million counteroffer just to spite Vanguard. The projected user acquisition numbers and early revenue models he provided are staggering. Those numbers are a complete fabrication, I stated flatly, holding his gaze. And the algorithm they are buying does not belong to the founder. It belongs to me. I built the architecture from the ground up, writing every single line of code over the course of 2 years. The founder is my boyfriend. Or rather, he was until he forged my signature on federal documents to steal my equity and secure this deal to marry into Vanguard's founding family. Elias looked up from the screen, a flicker of genuine intrigue breaking through his stoic exterior. Forgery is a massive accusation, Miss Washington. But corporate theft happens every single day in this industry. Why bring this to me? Why not go straight to the federal authorities and shut the deal down right now? If you want revenge, a call to the Federal Bureau of Investigation is far more efficient than a flight to New York. Because shutting it down now does not benefit me, and it certainly does not benefit you, I explained, leaning slightly forward, meeting his challenge with absolute predatory focus. If I blow the whistle today, Vanguard simply walks away unscathed. They lose a little time, Marcus goes to jail, and the company dissolves into bankruptcy. I get nothing but a moral victory. But if you look at the secondary files I have provided on that screen, you will see exactly why we need Vanguard to sign that contract and wire those funds tomorrow night. Elias tapped the screen, opening the encrypted financial ledgers I had downloaded from Marcus's servers while lying in my hospital bed. He put on his reading glasses, his sharp eyes scanning the rows of dense financial data. For a few moments, the only sound in the massive corner office was the soft hum of the city traffic far below. Then the billionaire let out a low, incredibly impressed whistle. He is not just faking his user acquisition costs, Elias murmured, tracing a line of data with his index finger. He is actively using the seed money from his initial angel investors to artificially inflate the returns of his beta testers. He is masking his massive capital burn rate by shifting the liabilities into a dummy marketing budget. Exactly, I confirmed, a sharp, cold smile touching my lips. Marcus took a fraudulent $500,000 loan that my brother illegally secured against my mother's home. But he did not just use that cash to lease luxury cars and buy public relations pieces. He used the bulk of that money to fabricate a legitimate revenue stream. He created dummy vendor accounts that purchased his own software licenses, making it look like the algorithm was generating organic, massive enterprise sales. He then used that fake revenue to pay dividends to his early investors, claiming it was pure profit. Marcus is running a highly sophisticated algorithmic micro-Ponzi scheme. Elias removed his glasses, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and profound respect. It is a textbook Ponzi structure beautifully disguised as explosive tech sector growth. He is desperate for Vanguard's $15 million because his entire house of cards is about to collapse. He has leveraged illegal loans to fund the illusion just long enough to get Vanguard to sign the check. If Vanguard signs that term sheet tomorrow, they are legally inheriting a completely fraudulent cap table. And Vanguard is too arrogant and blinded by their own nepotism to see it, I added smoothly. Chloe's father wants Marcus to be his son-in-law so badly that he rushed the due diligence process. His lawyers just rubber-stamped the paperwork to keep the family happy. He is selling them a stolen product built on a completely fraudulent financial foundation. This is a federal crime on multiple levels. I let the silence hang for a moment, letting the sheer magnitude of the impending disaster fully sink in. Then I laid out my endgame. Here is my proposal, Mr. Thorne. Tomorrow night, I am going to walk into that gala at the Four Seasons. I am going to let Vanguard Capital sign that contract in front of every major tech journalist and investor in the city. And the exact moment the ink is dry, I am going to drop this entire digital dossier into the hands of the federal authorities who are already on standby waiting for my signal. I am going to publicly detonate Marcus on that stage. Elias steepled his fingers, a dark, incredibly predatory smile slowly spreading across his face as he realized the true scale of my plan. When you do that, Vanguard Capital will be instantly tied to a massive federal fraud investigation. Their flawless reputation will be dragged through the mud. The financial press will have an absolute field day, knowing they were swindled by a charismatic amateur. Their stock valuation will plummet, and the $15 million they just wired into the startup's accounts will be frozen by the federal government. Precisely, I said, my voice echoing with quiet authority. Marcus will be arrested on stage. The startup will instantly go into federal receivership, and its valuation will crash to absolute zero. But the core technology, my algorithm, is still flawless. It is completely insulated from his financial crimes. Once the dust settles and the federal government liquidates the company's assets to pay off the fines, I want you to step in. Step. Elias nodded slowly, fully grasping the brilliance of the hostile takeover I had just orchestrated. Pinnacle Apex Capital sweeps in and buys the distressed assets for pennies on the dollar during the federal liquidation auction. We acquire a revolutionary, fully functional risk management algorithm for a tiny fraction of its true market value. You acquire the assets, I corrected him, smoothly holding my ground. But I retain 51% controlling interest, and I am officially installed as the chief executive officer. You get the flawless technology, you get a massive return on investment, and you get to watch Vanguard Capital become the laughingstock of Wall Street. I get my company back fully funded and completely cleansed of every single parasite who tried to steal it from me. Elias Thorne stared at me for a long, quiet minute. In the cutthroat, male-dominated world of high finance, you rarely meet someone who operates with such calculated, cold-blooded precision. He saw a woman who had been betrayed, hospitalized, and robbed by the very people who were supposed to protect her. Yet instead of crying or accepting defeat, she had engineered a multi-million-dollar corporate trap that would completely destroy her enemies and secure her own empire. He reached across the black marble desk and extended his hand. Miss Washington, you are one of the most terrifyingly brilliant financial minds I have ever had the pleasure of meeting. You have yourself a deal. Detonate the bomb tomorrow night. My legal team will be ready to execute the hostile takeover the moment they put the handcuffs on him. I reached out and shook his hand, his firm grip validating my victory. Thank you, Mr. Thorne. It is going to be a spectacular show. I picked up my tablet, stood up, and smoothed the fabric of my tailored skirt. I turned and walked out of the massive corner office, my red Louboutin heels clicking triumphantly against the polished floors all the way to the elevator. The trap was now fully funded, legally sound, and backed by the most powerful titan on Wall Street. Marcus thought he was about to sign the deal of a lifetime. He had absolutely no idea he was just signing his own federal arrest warrant. The game was officially over. Tomorrow night, I was going to collect my winnings. The flight back to Atlanta was a blur of high-altitude turbulence and laser-focused strategizing. By the time I unlocked the door to my penthouse apartment, the city was already draped in the heavy shadows of early evening. I did not bother turning on the main living room lights. I walked straight down the hallway, my heels silent on the plush carpet, and pushed open the heavy oak door to my home office. This was my sanctuary. This was the war room where I had spent countless sleepless nights building the algorithm that Marcus was currently using to parade around as a Silicon Valley prodigy. I sat down in my ergonomic leather chair and pressed the power button on the master console. Instantly, 3 massive curved monitors flared to life, casting a stark bluish-white glow across my face. A camera placed in this room would have to utilize fast whip pans to capture the sheer volume of data rapidly scrolling across the screens. Windows popped open, terminal commands ran in the background, and secure banking portals loaded with clinical precision. I ignored the lingering ache in my abdomen from my surgery. The pain was entirely overshadowed by the sheer adrenaline of the financial execution I was about to perform. Marcus and my family operated under a very specific, deeply flawed assumption about my finances. Because I lived relatively modestly, drove a practical sedan, and never flaunted designer labels the way Sarah and Marcus did, they assumed I was just a comfortable corporate worker bee. They thought my salary as a mergers and acquisitions advisor was my only source of income. Marcus truly believed that he was the financial powerhouse of our relationship, the visionary destined to elevate us to the upper echelons of society. He had absolutely no idea that while he was blowing my brother's illegal loan on leased sports cars and public relations stunts to look rich, I was actually accumulating massive liquid wealth in absolute silence. For the past 5 years outside of my corporate job, I had been running an independent, highly exclusive financial consulting firm. I specialized in auditing distressed assets for private equity groups. I was the person they called to quietly investigate a company before a massive buyout. It was grueling, highly confidential work that paid astronomical fees. I routed every single cent of that consulting money into a secure offshore holding company that I controlled entirely. My hidden portfolio was sitting on just over $2 million in pure, unencumbered cash. I had the kind of quiet, invisible wealth that did not need to be validated by an Instagram post or a Michelin-starred dinner. And tonight, I was going to use a fraction of that secret arsenal to legally sever my family's lifeline. I pulled up the audio recording from the Thanksgiving dinner on my left monitor. I skipped to the exact timestamp where DeAndre arrogantly bragged about the dummy construction company he used to bypass the bank's underwriting department. I listened to him say the name of the shell corporation aloud. Prestige Historic Renovations, LLC. That was the entity holding the fraudulent $500,000 commercial loan tied to my mother's property. On my center monitor, I accessed the state's corporate registry database and ran a query on Prestige Historic Renovations. Within seconds, the search returned the company's public filing documents. DeAndre was listed as the sole registered agent. I then cross-referenced the LLC with the county clerk's property records to find the exact lien placed against my mother's home. The records showed that the loan had been underwritten by a mid-tier regional bank headquartered just outside of Atlanta. I picked up my desk phone and dialed the direct line for the regional bank's commercial lending and distressed assets division. It was past standard business hours, but in the world of high finance, the departments handling high-risk debt never truly close. A senior portfolio manager answered on the second ring, sounding exhausted. "Good evening," I said, keeping my voice authoritative and brisk. "I am an authorized representative for a private equity acquisition group. We are currently analyzing commercial paper in the Atlanta metropolitan area, and we are interested in immediately purchasing a specific commercial lien held by your institution. The portfolio manager hesitated, the sound of keyboard clicking echoing over the line. What is the loan origination number? I read him the exact filing number tied to DeAndre's dummy corporation. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the phone. The bank knew exactly which loan I was talking about. Commercial loans issued for historic renovations are highly scrutinized, and because DeAndre and Sarah had submitted fake invoices and a bribed appraisal, the bank's automated risk algorithms were likely already flagging the account for irregularities. Banks despise holding fraudulent or highly risky paper. It damages their liquidity ratios. When a private buyer offers to take that toxic debt off their hands, they practically trip over themselves to finalize the transfer. We hold that paper, the manager confirmed cautiously. But it is a newly originated loan. The principal balance is currently sitting at $520,000. Are you looking to purchase the debt at a discount? I am looking to purchase the debt at a premium, I replied smoothly. My group will pay $550,000 in a direct, immediate wire transfer to assume full legal ownership of the promissory note, the primary lien on the collateral property, and all associated acceleration rights. We want the paper transferred tonight. There was a stunned silence on the line. I was offering them a guaranteed profit to wash their hands of a fraudulent loan. It was an offer no sane banker could ever refuse. I can have the digital transfer documents drawn up and sent to your secure portal in 10 minutes. The manager finally said, his voice practically vibrating with eagerness. Excellent, I replied. Send it to the holding company email I am about to provide. I hung up the phone and turned my attention to the right monitor logging directly into my offshore holding account. The transfer documents arrived exactly 10 minutes later. I meticulously read through every single line of the legal contract. The bank was signing over all rights, titles, and interests in the loan originally issued to DeAndre's dummy corporation. Most importantly, the contract explicitly included the transfer of the collateral rights. The collateral was my mother's house. I verified the routing numbers typed in the authorization codes and initiated the wire transfer. $550,000 vanished from my secret savings account and shot through the digital ether directly into the regional bank's corporate treasury. Seconds later, a green confirmation banner flashed across my center monitor. The transaction was complete. The digital deed of trust, the promissory note, and the absolute legal authority over the property downloaded directly into my encrypted hard drive. I leaned back in my leather chair, letting the stark blue light of the monitors wash over my face. The room was deathly quiet, save for the low hum of the computer towers. I reached out and gently touched the screen, tracing the digital signature my mother had blindly scrawled on the loan documents, tricked by her own son. The legal trap was now completely flawlessly set. By purchasing the debt, I had not just saved my mother's house from the bank. I had become the bank. I was now the sole undisputed lien holder of the property. I held the absolute power of foreclosure in the palm of my hand. Because DeAndre had secured the loan through documented verifiable fraud, using fake invoices and a bribed appraiser, the standard terms of the mortgage were entirely voided. As the new owner of the debt, I had the legal right to trigger the acceleration clause immediately. I did not have to wait for him to miss a monthly payment. I could demand the entire $500,000 balance be paid in full within 24 hours. And when DeAndre inevitably failed to produce that cash, I had the absolute legal authority to seize the property and evict every single person living inside it. I stared at the paperwork, a heavy, profound realization washing over me. I thought about Sarah sitting at the Thanksgiving table, aggressively cutting her turkey and bragging about forging documents. I thought about her condescending tone telling me to be a strong Black woman and endure the humiliation of Marcus's infidelity. I thought about DeAndre puffing out his chest, willing to render our mother homeless just to buy his way into a tech billionaire's inner circle. And I thought about my mother defending Marcus, telling me to fix my face and accept my place in the shadows of a successful man. They had all conspired to sacrifice me. They had viewed me as nothing more than collateral damage in their desperate, pathetic scramble for wealth and status. They thought my mother's house was their ultimate safety net, their golden ticket to the upper class. They had absolutely no idea that I now owned the ground they walked on. I owned the roof over their heads. I owned the very walls that had sheltered their betrayal. If I snapped my fingers, my traitorous brother, his racist, entitled wife, and my enabling mother would be out on the streets with nothing but the clothes on their backs. A cold, terrifyingly calm smile spread across my face. The pieces were no longer just moving on the board. The board itself belonged to me. The Vanguard Capital Gala was less than 24 hours away. Marcus was picking up his tailored tuxedo. Chloe was likely getting her hair and makeup done. My family was preparing to toast to their brilliant financial heist. I reached over and turned off the monitors one by one. The office plunged into total darkness. I stood up, the pain in my stomach completely gone, replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated power. Tomorrow night, I was going to walk into the Four Seasons Hotel. I was going to let them stand on the highest stage in the city. And then I was going to burn their entire world to the ground. Saturday evening arrived with a heavy electric tension hanging over the city of Atlanta. Inside my penthouse, the atmosphere was completely still. I stood in the center of my master bedroom, staring at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. If a camera were circling me in a slow, continuous arc, it would not capture the image of a fragile, heartbroken woman recovering from surgery. It would capture a soldier strapping on her armor for a final decisive battle. I had completely rejected the standard pastel evening gowns hanging in my closet. Those dresses were designed to make women look delicate, agreeable, and ornamental. They were the kind of dresses Marcus always picked out for me when he wanted me to stand quietly in the background and smile for his investors. Instead, I reached for a custom-tailored crimson-red power suit. The color was intentional. It was aggressive, unapologetic, and impossible to ignore. I pulled the structured blazer over my shoulders and zipped up the perfectly fitted trousers. The fabric was sleek and sharp. I slipped my feet into the same crimson-red Louboutin heels I had worn to Wall Street the day before. I applied a bold, dark red lipstick, tying my hair back into a sleek, severe style that left my face completely exposed. I looked sharp enough to draw blood. I walked out of the bedroom and back into my home office. The 3 massive monitors were glowing brightly in the dim room. It was time to arm the explosive. I sat down at the console and opened my encrypted email client. I drafted a message to the senior legal team at Pinnacle Apex Capital in New York. I attached the final comprehensive digital dossier. It contained the server logs proving Marcus had forged the intellectual property transfer from his personal laptop. It contained the altered financial ledgers exposing his micro-Ponzi scheme. And it contained the fully executed legal transfer of my mother's defaulted mortgage, proving that I now held absolute authority over his primary collateral. I typed a single sentence in the body of the email. The target will be on stage in exactly 1 hour. Be ready to execute the hostile takeover. I hovered my finger over the mouse, took a deep breath, and clicked send. The progress bar flashed green. The data was officially in the hands of the most ruthless corporate raiders in the financial district. A moment later, my cell phone vibrated violently against the glass surface of my desk. I picked it up and unlocked the screen. It was a text message from a highly secured, untraceable number. The contact was a senior investigator within the white-collar crime division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We had been quietly communicating for the past 48 hours after I anonymously tipped them off to a massive wire fraud operation happening in their jurisdiction. The text message was brief, clinical, and absolutely devastating. Financial forensics have verified the server logs and the forged signatures. Federal warrants have been signed by a judge. Agents are currently in position at the venue. Await your signal. I locked the phone and slid it into the inner pocket of my red blazer. A wave of pure, icy adrenaline washed over my entire body. There was no going back now. The federal government was officially involved and they were waiting for me to pull the trigger. Marcus thought he had flawlessly manipulated the legal and financial systems to his advantage. He had no idea that the real system was currently surrounding his extravagant party, waiting to snap a pair of steel handcuffs around his wrists. I turned off the computer monitors, grabbed my clutch, and walked out of the apartment. The elevator ride down to the parking garage was silent. My mind was racing, visualizing exactly how the night was going to unfold. I stepped out of the lobby and into the cool night air. A sleek black town car was idling at the curb waiting for me. I had hired a private driver for the evening. I wanted to be entirely focused, free from the distraction of navigating Atlanta traffic. I opened the heavy door and slid into the luxurious leather back seat. "Take me to the Four Seasons Hotel downtown," I instructed the driver, keeping my voice perfectly level. "And please take the fastest route. I have a very important appointment." The town car pulled away from the curb and merged into the heavy Saturday night traffic. I sat in the darkness of the back seat, watching the vibrant city lights blur past the tinted windows. The contrast between my internal state and the world outside was stark. The city was alive with people laughing, drinking, and heading out for a night of celebration. I was heading out to execute a corporate and familial slaughter. I thought about what was happening inside the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons at this exact moment. The Vanguard Capitol Gala was legendary for its opulence. There would be walls of fresh white roses, towering crystal champagne towers, and a live string quartet playing modern pop songs. Chloe was likely wearing a designer gown that cost more than a luxury car, clinging to Marcus's arm, completely convinced she had found the perfect partner. Her billionaire father was probably shaking hands with politicians and tech journalists, aggressively boasting about the brilliant new founder he was bringing into the Vanguard family. And then there was my own flesh and blood, DeAndre and Sarah. I could vividly picture them standing near the VIP section, drinking the most expensive alcohol they could find. Sarah would be loudly bragging to anyone who would listen about how her brother-in-law was a tech genius, desperately trying to validate her own proximity to wealth. DeAndre would be nervously checking his watch, counting down the minutes until the term sheet was signed, so he could finally pay off the fraudulent bank loan and pocket his millions. They genuinely believed I was lying in my bed across town, too weak and broken to interfere with their golden ticket. They thought they had successfully discarded me. The town car turned a sharp corner, and the towering, brilliantly illuminated facade of the Four Seasons Hotel came into view. The circular driveway was absolute chaos. A massive red carpet stretched from the street all the way up the grand marble steps to the main entrance. A line of luxury vehicles, Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, and Maybachs, were slowly pulling up to the valet stand. A crowd of local paparazzi and financial reporters were gathered behind velvet ropes, eagerly snapping photos of the city's elite as they stepped out of their cars. This was the maximum point of suspense. This was the moment where the narrative Marcus had carefully constructed was supposed to reach its flawless climax. He had removed the only obstacle in his path. He had silenced the woman who built his empire. He was ready to claim his crown. My driver slowly navigated the black town car into the crowded driveway, pulling up right to the edge of the red carpet. The vehicle came to a smooth, silent stop. A hotel valet in a crisp uniform immediately stepped forward and reached for the chrome door handle. I took one final deep breath. I let go of the pain from my surgery. I let go of the 4 years I had wasted loving a man who viewed me as a disposable asset. I let go of the lingering attachment to a family that had willingly mortgaged my future for their own greed. I was no longer the quiet, supportive girlfriend. I was the architect of their destruction, and it was time to collect my debts. The valet pulled the door open. The bright, blinding flashes of the paparazzi cameras immediately flooded the back seat of the car. I stepped out into the chaotic, flashing light. The sharp click of my crimson-red Louboutin heels hitting the pavement echoed loudly, slicing through the ambient noise of the crowd. I stood up to my full height, smoothing the crisp lapels of my tailored red suit. I did not look like a woman who had come to quietly watch from the sidelines. I looked like absolute royalty, and I was stepping straight onto the battlefield. I ignored the murmurs of the reporters and the curious stares of the wealthy guests. I kept my eyes locked on the towering glass doors of the hotel lobby. I began to walk up the red carpet, my stride powerful, calculated, and completely unstoppable. 0 hour had arrived. The game of shadows was over. It was time to walk into the light and show them exactly what happens when you try to bury a woman who owns the entire graveyard. The heavy glass doors of the Four Seasons lobby slid open, welcoming me into a world of polished marble and sparkling crystal. I did not break my stride. I walked with a smooth, relentless forward momentum, my crimson-red suit catching the reflections of the massive chandeliers overhead. The lobby was buzzing with hotel guests and event staff, but I moved through them like a ghost with a singular, devastating purpose. My red Louboutin heels clicked a steady, rhythmic march across the pristine floor, leading me straight toward the grand ballroom at the end of the main corridor. As I approached the entrance, the sheer scale of Vanguard Capital's wealth became immediately apparent. The massive double mahogany doors were flanked by two towering security guards wearing crisp black suits and earpieces. They were stationed there to ensure that Marcus's carefully constructed fantasy remained completely undisturbed. As I walked up to the entrance, the guard on the right immediately stepped forward, holding up a large, calloused hand to block my path. "I am sorry, ma'am," the guard said, his voice deep and authoritative. "This ballroom is reserved for a private corporate gala. Access is strictly limited to the approved guest list and credentialed media." I did not stop to argue. I did not raise my voice or try to explain who I was. Men like Marcus always build walls to keep the truth out, but they forget that money buys a sledgehammer. Without breaking eye contact with the guard, I calmly reached into my clutch and pulled out a solid black laser-engraved metal card. It was a Diamond 5 IP Access Pass, a token of absolute unrestricted clearance provided to me by Elias Thorne just hours ago. Pinnacle Apex Capital owned a massive stake in the hospitality group that managed this hotel, and this card signaled to the staff that I was essentially an owner. I held the heavy metal card up in the air. The guard looked at it, his eyes widening slightly as he recognized the insignia. The authoritative posture instantly vanished. He swallowed hard, quickly stepping back and nodding to his partner. "My apologies, ma'am. Please go right in." Both guards reached for the heavy brass handles and pulled the massive mahogany doors open. A blast of noise, bright light, and live music immediately washed over me. I stood at the threshold for a brief second, taking in the breathtaking opulence of the room. It was a masterpiece of corporate extravagance. Floor-to-ceiling walls of fresh white roses framed the perimeter. Crystal champagne towers stood at every corner, sparkling under the intense professional stage lighting. Nearly 500 of Atlanta's most elite venture capitalists, tech journalists, and high society socialites were packed into the room wearing tailored black tuxedos and glittering designer gowns. At the very front of the room was a raised, brightly lit stage, and standing right in the center of it was Marcus. He looked like a king about to be crowned. He was wearing a custom midnight blue tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. Standing directly beside him was Chloe, wearing a breathtaking silver silk gown, her hair styled in soft, elegant waves. Her billionaire father stood at the podium microphone, his booming voice echoing through the massive ballroom speakers. "We are not just here tonight to invest $15 million into a revolutionary piece of technology," Chloe's father announced, smiling warmly at the crowd. "We are here to invest in a visionary. A young man who built an empire from the ground up through sheer brilliance and unwavering integrity. Marcus represents the future of the financial sector, and more importantly, he represents the future of my family." The billionaire reached over and proudly took his daughter's hand, raising it into the air for the audience to see. A massive, flawless diamond ring caught the stage lights flashing brilliantly. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Marcus had done it. He had secured the $15 million funding, and he had publicly secured the billionaire heiress. Thank you, Marcus said into the microphone, flashing his signature charismatic smile as the applause died down. This is the greatest night of my life. He turned and stepped toward a sleek glass table positioned at the front of the stage. Resting on top of it was a thick, leather-bound portfolio containing the final Vanguard Capital term sheet. Beside it rested a gold Montblanc pen. The room fell into a quiet, reverent hush. The press photographers raised their cameras, waiting to capture the exact moment the historic deal was signed. Marcus picked up the gold pen. He leaned over the table, pressing the tip of the pen against the thick parchment paper. And then I took my first step into the ballroom. I did not try to sneak in. I stepped fully into the brilliant ambient light of the room, my crimson-red suit violently contrasting with the sea of black and white formal wear. The sharp, piercing click of my heels echoed across the hardwood floor near the entrance. A few people standing near the back turned around to see who was arriving late. When they saw me, their conversations instantly died. The silence was highly contagious. It spread like a rapid shockwave from the back of the ballroom all the way to the front rows. The soft murmurs, the clinking of champagne glasses, the polite laughter, it all vanished. Within 5 seconds, the massive room came to a dead, terrifying halt. The crowd instinctively parted, stepping aside to create a wide, completely unobstructed path straight down the center aisle, leading directly to the stage. I kept my chin held high, my face locked into a mask of pure, unbothered authority. I walked slowly down the center aisle, letting the sheer weight of my presence crush the celebratory atmosphere. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted the VIP section near the front of the stage. Sarah was standing there in her emerald green silk gown, holding a glass of wine. When her eyes locked onto me, all the color drained from her face. Her jaw dropped open in absolute unmasked horror. The wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering loudly against the polished floor, sending dark red liquid splashing across her designer shoes. Beside her, DeAndre froze completely. He looked as if he had just seen a ghost. His eyes darted frantically around the room, his chest heaving as the reality of my arrival shattered his arrogant delusions. They knew exactly what this meant. I was not sick, I was not compliant, and their $500,000 golden ticket was suddenly standing on a trap door. Up on the stage, the sudden deafening silence of the crowd finally broke through Marcus's intense focus. The gold pen hovered just a fraction of an inch above the signature line. He frowned in confusion and slowly lifted his head, turning his gaze away from the contract and out toward the center aisle. His eyes found me immediately. The crimson-red suit made me the absolute focal point of the entire room. The confident, charismatic tech CEO crumbled into dust right in front of my eyes. The charming smile literally fell off his face. The blood drained from his cheeks so fast he turned ghost white, his skin taking on a sickly pale hue under the bright stage lights. His hands began to visibly tremble. He stared at me, looking at my perfect posture, my sharp red lipstick, and the absolute lethal calm in my eyes. In that terrifying split second, the illusion he had built shattered. He realized that the woman he thought he had successfully manipulated and buried was standing right in the center of his kingdom, and she had come to collect. I did not stop at the edge of the stage. I bypassed the small set of stairs entirely and walked confidently up the center ramp, my red heels sinking slightly into the plush carpet. The closer I got to Marcus, the more the illusion of his power dissolved. I could see the fine sheen of sweat breaking out across his forehead. I could see the pulse jumping erratically in his neck above his starched white collar. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a massive, accelerating freight train. Chloe looked confused, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows knitting together as she glanced between me and Marcus. She leaned into him, whispering something, but Marcus was completely paralyzed. Her billionaire father stood frozen at the podium, his hand still resting on the microphone stand, unsure if I was a part of the planned presentation or a rogue element. His security detail began to move forward from the wings, but he raised a single finger silently, ordering them to hold. He was a businessman who respected confidence, and my entrance reeked of absolute, undeniable authority. I stepped right up to the podium. I stood so close to Marcus that I could smell the expensive cologne he had doused himself in. He opened his mouth, his lips trembling desperately, trying to formulate a whisper that would make me stop. "Nia, please," he mouthed, his voice barely a breath. "What are you doing?" I did not even look at him. I reached out and firmly took the microphone from the billionaire father's hand. He yielded it to me, stepping back with a calculating look in his eyes. He wanted to see how this was going to play out. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice echoing like thunder through the massive ballroom speakers. The sound system was flawless, carrying every syllable to the furthest corners of the room. "My name is Nia Washington. I am a senior mergers and acquisitions advisor, but more relevantly to tonight's proceedings, I am the lead architect of the core technology you are all gathered here to celebrate. And up until about 30 seconds ago, I was also Marcus's girlfriend of 4 years." A collective audible gasp rippled through the crowd. The flashing of the press cameras suddenly doubled in speed, the rapid clicks sounding like a swarm of mechanical locusts. I could hear the frantic murmurs spreading through the audience. Down in the VIP section, I saw Sarah cover her mouth with both hands while DeAndre took a panicked step backward, bumping into a waiter. I turned slightly to face Marcus. He was visibly shaking now. The arrogant tech founder had completely vanished, replaced by a terrified little boy. Marcus has spent the entire evening talking about transparency, innovation, and building a foundation of absolute trust. I continued, my tone dripping with lethal polite sarcasm. He speaks so passionately about the future. But I have always believed that if you want to understand a man's future, you have to look very closely at what he does in the dark. I reached into the pocket of my red blazer and pulled out my cell phone. With a few swift, practiced motions, I accessed the venue's open wireless casting network. I had scouted the audio-visual system protocols earlier that afternoon from my home office. It took exactly 3 seconds to bypass their basic security firewall and mirror my screen directly to the massive LED displays towering behind the stage. The giant screens, which had proudly displayed the Vanguard Capital logo just moments before, suddenly flickered. They went pitch black for a split second before illuminating with a crystal-clear, high-definition screenshot of my text message thread with Marcus. The text messages were from the night before. They were time-stamped, undeniable, and perfectly legible for every single billionaire investor and journalist in the room. Since Vanguard Capital prides itself on thorough due diligence, I thought I should provide a little more context regarding the founder you are about to enrich, I announced, raising the microphone slightly. I turned to look in the massive screen, reading the words aloud, so my voice would carry over the rising chaos in the room. "I hate pretending with Chloe." I read, my voice ringing out with crystal clarity. "Just waiting to secure her dad's bag, then I am dropping her for you." The silence that followed those words was the heaviest, most suffocating silence I had ever experienced in my entire life. It was a vacuum that sucked all the air out of the grand ballroom. 500 of the most powerful people in Atlanta stared up at the screen, reading the raw, unfiltered greed and betrayal projected in 10-foot-tall glowing letters. I slowly turned my head to look at Chloe. The poor girl looked as if she had been physically struck by a speeding vehicle. The blood completely drained from her beautiful face. She stared up at the massive screen, her mouth opening and closing silently. She looked down at Marcus, then back up at the screen, her mind frantically trying to process the sheer magnitude of the public humiliation she was currently experiencing. She had believed she was entering a powerful partnership based on mutual respect and affection. In reality, she was nothing but a pawn, a shiny object Marcus used to unlock a bank vault. Marcus reached out his hands, shaking violently as he tried to touch her arm. "Chloe, baby, please," he stammered, his voice cracking with pure panic. "It is a fake. She is a hacker. She fabricated that message because she is a jealous, crazy ex-girlfriend. I swear to you, I never sent that." But Chloe was not a fool. She recognized his phrasing. She recognized the specific way he typed, the lack of punctuation, the raw desperation in his voice. The shock in her eyes rapidly hardened, freezing into a look of absolute explosive fury. "Do not ever touch me again," she shrieked. And then she swung her arm. The slap was spectacular. It was a full-force, open-palmed strike that echoed through the entire ballroom like a gunshot. She hit him so hard that Marcus stumbled sideways, completely losing his balance. He crashed into the glass table, sending the gold Mont Blanc pen clattering onto the hardwood floor. The crowd erupted. It was total, unmitigated chaos. The polite, refined atmosphere of the gala dissolved into a frenzy of shouting, pointing, and frantic camera flashes. The paparazzi were losing their minds, capturing every single angle of the spectacular implosion. Marcus grabbed his face, a bright red handprint already blooming across his cheek. He looked utterly pathetic, completely stripped of his dignity and his manufactured charm. But Chloe's slap was only the opening act. Her father, the billionaire titan of Vanguard Capital, stepped forward. His face was a mask of terrifying, calculated rage. He did not yell. He did not scream. Men with that much power do not need to raise their voices to destroy you. He walked calmly over to the glass table where Marcus had just stumbled. He picked up the thick leather-bound portfolio containing the $15 million term sheet. Marcus scrambled to his feet, holding his hands up in a desperate gesture of surrender. "Sir, please," he begged, tears actually forming in his eyes. "You have to listen to me. This is a setup. The technology is real. The algorithm works. Do not let her ruin this deal." The billionaire looked at Marcus with a level of disgust usually reserved for insects. "You arrogant, stupid little boy." He set his voice low, but carrying perfectly over the podium microphone that I was still holding. "You thought you could use my daughter to secure a paycheck? You thought you could play my family for fools in front of my entire network." He grasped the thick stack of legal contracts with both hands. With one swift, violent motion, he tore the $15 million agreement completely in half. The sound of the heavy parchment ripping was the sound of Marcus's entire future evaporating into thin air. The billionaire threw the shredded pieces of the contract directly into Marcus's face. The papers fluttered to the ground like dead leaves. "The deal is dead," the father announced, glaring down at Marcus. "And as of tonight, so is your career. If you ever come within 100 yards of my daughter or my firm again, I will personally ensure that you never find employment in the financial sector for the rest of your miserable life. Security, get this garbage off my stage." Marcus collapsed to his knees right there on the red carpet. He buried his face in his hands, completely broken. The $15 million was gone. The billionaire heiress was gone. The respect of the entire venture capital community was gone. In less than 3 minutes, I had systematically vaporized his social standing and his corporate future. He was a laughingstock, a cautionary tale that would be written about in every tech blog and financial newspaper by morning. I stood at the podium perfectly still in my crimson-red suit, looking down at the weeping man who had tried to discard me. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no remorse. The pain of the surgery, the sting of his infidelity, the arrogance of his lies, they were all washed away by a rising tide of pure, cold satisfaction. But as I watched the security guards rush the stage to drag Marcus away, I knew my work was not quite finished. Exposing the affair and destroying the Vanguard deal was only the first phase of the punishment. I had broken his heart and his ego. Now it was time to break his freedom. I reached into my pocket and hit send on the second text message to my contact at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It was time for the main event. As my finger lifted from the send button on my phone, the chaos inside the grand ballroom was still raging at full volume. Security guards were cautiously advancing toward the stage, unsure of how to handle the situation, while Chloe was being quickly ushered away by her mother to avoid the flashing cameras of the paparazzi. I raised the microphone back to my lips. My voice, amplified and entirely unwavering, cut through the noise like a newly sharpened blade. "Sir," I said, addressing Chloe's billionaire father directly, "you are understandably furious right now, but you should actually be thanking me. By tearing that contract in half, you did not just save your daughter from a pathetic gold digger, you saved your entire venture capital firm from a massive, highly publicized federal indictment." The billionaire stopped in his tracks, turning slowly to look at me. The sheer authority in my voice commanded the room, and the frantic murmuring of the crowd began to quickly die down. I tapped the screen of my phone, advancing the digital presentation on the massive LED displays towering behind the stage. The screenshot of Marcus's text message vanished, replaced instantly by a dense, highlighted spreadsheet of server logs and legal documents. "That contract you were about to sign was absolute garbage," I declared, pacing slowly across the front of the stage. "Marcus does not own the algorithm he just pitched to you. I do. I built the architecture from the ground up. I wrote every single line of code. 2 days ago, while I was heavily medicated in a hospital bed undergoing a major surgery, Marcus used his personal laptop to forge my signature on a federal intellectual property transfer document." I pointed up at the massive screen behind me. "Right there, you can see the Internet Protocol address, the device media access control address, and the precise timestamp proving the document was generated on his home network. He committed federal forgery to make his capitalization table look clean enough for your legal team to approve the funding." Marcus stopped crying. He slowly looked up at the screen, his tear-streaked face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He finally realized that I had breached his highly secured servers. He realized that I had every single piece of data he thought he had successfully hidden. But the forgery is not even the best part. I continued swiping my finger across my phone to load the next slide. A complex accounting ledger appeared with bright red circles drawn around specific recurring transactions. Vanguard Capital was about to invest $15 million based on projected user acquisition and enterprise sales data. But Marcus has no real enterprise clients? He has been running a highly sophisticated micro-Ponzi scheme. The financial elite in the audience gasped collectively. Tech journalists pulled out their digital recorders and began furiously typing on their phones, realizing they were witnessing the greatest corporate implosion of the decade. "He used a fraudulent $500,000 commercial loan to create dummy vendor accounts," I explained, breaking down his entire criminal enterprise step by step for the most powerful investors in the city. "He used those fake accounts to purchase his own software licenses, creating the illusion of explosive organic growth. He then used that fabricated revenue to pay dividends to his early investors. He was bleeding the company dry to fund his luxury public relations campaign, hoping your $15 million would hit his bank account before the entire house of cards collapsed. If you had signed that paper tonight, Vanguard Capital would have legally inherited a completely fraudulent enterprise, and the federal government would have frozen your assets by Monday morning." Chloe's father stared at the raw data displayed on the screen. He was a ruthless veteran of Wall Street. It only took his trained eyes a few seconds to verify that the ledgers I was projecting were completely authentic. The color drained from his face as he realized how incredibly close he had come to destroying his own empire and dragging his family name through the mud. Before anyone else could speak, a massive commotion erupted at the back of the ballroom. The heavy mahogany doors did not just swing open this time. They were thrown violently apart, hitting the walls with a deafening crash that echoed like a bomb going off. The steady, polished veneer of the high society gala was instantly shattered. The atmosphere shifted from corporate drama to pure chaotic panic. A dozen men and women wearing heavy tactical vests with the letters FBI emblazoned across their backs in bold yellow text stormed into the opulent ballroom. They moved in perfect militaristic formation, their hands resting on their holstered weapons. The intense red and blue strobe lights from the federal vehicles parked out on the street pierced through the lobby windows, casting a frantic, flashing glow over the terrified faces of the elite guests. The string quartet had long since fled the room. The only sounds left were the heavy, synchronized stomping of tactical boots on the hardwood floor and the sharp, barked orders of the federal agents commanding the wealthy crowd to step back and clear a path. A senior federal agent, a tall man with graying hair and a deeply serious expression, marched straight down the center aisle. He did not care about the designer gowns or the crystal champagne towers. He walked past billionaires and politicians without a single glance, his eyes locked entirely on his target. He marched directly up the stairs and onto the stage. Marcus tried to scramble backward, his expensive tuxedo pants slipping pathetically on the polished floor. He looked like a trapped rat desperately searching for a hole to crawl into. Marcus, the lead agent, announced, his voice booming with absolute authority. "You are under arrest. You are being charged with multiple counts of federal wire fraud, bank fraud, document forgery, and corporate espionage. Put your hands behind your back." Two heavily armed agents flanked Marcus, grabbing him by his shoulders and violently pulling him to his feet. Marcus kicked and thrashed completely, losing whatever shred of dignity he had left. "No, wait, you do not understand." Marcus screamed, his voice cracking hysterically as he tried to pull his arms away from the federal agents. "I am a founder. I am a tech chief executive officer. You cannot do this to me. This is my company." The sharp, unmistakable sound of heavy steel ratcheting shut echoed clearly across the stage as the handcuffs were locked tightly around his wrists, pinning his arms awkwardly behind his back. Marcus whipped his head around, his eyes wildly searching the terrified crowd until they landed directly on the VIP section. He spotted my brother standing near the edge of the stage. "DeAndre, tell them," Marcus shrieked, tears and spit flying from his face as he completely abandoned his loyalty. "Tell them about the loan. Tell them you took the money. You are in this too. You committed the bank fraud. Do not let them take me alone." DeAndre looked like he was going to vomit right there on the red carpet. He physically backed away from the stage, trying to hide behind Sarah, who was currently hyperventilating and clutching her emerald green silk gown in sheer, unadulterated terror. They were watching their golden goose turn into their absolute worst nightmare. Marcus was trying to drag them down into the flames with him, exactly as I knew he would, when the pressure finally broke him. "You have the right to remain silent," the lead agent shouted over Marcus's hysterical screaming, reciting his Miranda rights loudly and clearly as the agents began to physically drag him off the stage. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." They dragged him forcefully down the center aisle of the ballroom. Marcus was fighting, crying, and begging anyone who would listen to help him. The billionaires and investors he had tried so hard to impress simply turned their backs on him in absolute disgust. Just before they pushed him through the massive mahogany doors, Marcus looked back at the stage one last time. His eyes locked onto mine. They were wide with a mixture of absolute hatred and profound, shattering disbelief. He finally understood the gravity of his mistake. He realized that he had never been the smartest person in the room. He was just a pawn on my chessboard, and I had just gleefully sacrificed him to the federal government. The flashing red and blue lights from the lobby washed over his tear-stained face as the heavy doors closed behind him. His pathetic, desperate pleas were completely drowned out by the chaotic wailing of the police sirens echoing from the street below. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons was left in a state of absolute stunned paralysis. Expensive champagne glasses lay shattered on the floor. The $15 million Vanguard Capital contract was nothing more than shredded confetti scattered across the stage. The brilliant tech visionary of the year was currently being shoved into the back of an armored federal transport vehicle destined for a concrete cell. I stood alone at the podium, bathed in the bright, unforgiving stage lights, entirely untouched by the chaos I had just unleashed. I slowly lowered the microphone and smoothed the crisp lapels of my crimson-red suit. I looked out over the sea of shocked faces, my posture perfectly straight, my expression completely serene. Marcus was financially, socially, and legally destroyed. His entire life was officially over. But the night was still young, and my family's turn was rapidly approaching. I did not have to wait long for the second act of my revenge to begin. From the shattered remnants of the VIP section, two figures broke through the stunned crowd and scrambled toward the stage. DeAndre and Sarah looked completely pathetic. If there had been a camera looking down from the ceiling, the high-angle shot would have captured their absolute desperation perfectly. Sarah was practically tripping over the hem of her ruined emerald green silk gown, her perfectly blown-out blonde hair now a tangled, disheveled mess. DeAndre was trailing slightly behind her, his shoulders slumped, trembling like a frightened child who had just been caught stealing. Sarah reached the edge of the stage, her face twisted into a grotesque mask of panic and entitlement. She slammed her hands against the polished wood, her designer bracelets clanking loudly. "What did you just do?" she shrieked, her voice cracking, entirely stripped of her usual condescending tone. "What about our payout? The bank is expecting their money on Monday morning, Naya. What about your mother's house? We leveraged everything for this deal. You just destroyed your own family." I looked down at her. She was no longer the smug white savior sipping an organic kale smoothie in my hospital room, lecturing me about being a strong black woman supporting her man. She was just a greedy, desperate fraud watching her stolen wealth evaporate into the night air. I calmly unzipped the inner pocket of my red blazer and pulled out a neatly folded stack of thick legal papers. I did not hand them to her. I tossed them casually over the edge of the stage. The heavy documents hit the hardwood floor, sliding across the polish to land directly at Sarah's feet. DeAndre dropped to his knees, his hands shaking violently as he snatched up the papers. He scanned the front page, his eyes widening in absolute horror as he recognized the seal of his dummy construction corporation and the regional bank. "What is this?" he gasped, staring up at me with tears streaming down his face. "It says the debt was purchased by a private holding company. That holding company belongs to me," I stated, my voice echoing coldly across the silent ballroom. "I used my own independent wealth to buy the defaulted commercial loan you fraudulently secured against our mother's property. I hold the promissory note. I hold the deed of trust. The bank no longer owns that house. I do." Sarah let out a strangled, breathless sob, clutching her chest as her knees completely buckled. She collapsed onto the floor next to my brother, her arrogant facade shattered into a million irreparable pieces. "Since you secured that loan through documented federal fraud," I continued, looking directly into my brother's terrified eyes, "the acceleration clause has been immediately triggered. The entire $500,000 balance is due tonight. And since I know you do not have a dime to your name, I am executing my right to seize the collateral. The house is legally in my name. You have exactly 24 hours to pack your bags and get the hell out of my property." The chaotic flashing lights of the Four Seasons ballroom slowly fade away, replaced by the quiet, sophisticated stillness of my present-day penthouse. The sweeping skyline of Atlanta twinkles brightly through my floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm golden glow across the plush velvet sofa where I am currently sitting. It has been exactly 1 year since the Vanguard Capital Gala. A lot can change in 12 months when you finally stop playing the victim and start playing the game. The federal justice system is notoriously slow, but federal prosecutors absolutely do not lose slam-dunk cases backed by irrefutable digital evidence. Marcus was found guilty on every single charge. He was convicted of wire fraud, bank fraud, document forgery, and corporate espionage. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. There are no tailored suits or Michelin-starred dinners in federal prison, and Chloe certainly has not been visiting him. Her billionaire father completely erased Marcus from their family history within 24 hours. As for my own family, my eviction notice was not an empty threat. DeAndre and Sarah frantically tried to secure another loan to pay off the $500,000 debt, but their credit was completely destroyed by the fraudulent shell company investigation. I foreclosed on the property the very next day. I forced them to pack up their expensive clothes and move into a cramped, run-down apartment on the absolute outskirts of the city. The massive stress of their financial ruin completely shattered their toxic marriage. Sarah filed for divorce 3 months later, predictably blaming DeAndre for everything. She left him drowning in legal fees and insurmountable debt. My mother had to move into a modest assisted living facility. She still complains to anyone who will listen about how ruthlessly I handled the situation, but I stopped answering her phone calls months ago. I refuse to be a life raft for the people who actively tried to drown me. The hostile takeover with Pinnacle Apex Capital went exactly as Elias Thorne and I had meticulously planned. While Marcus was sitting in a cold holding cell awaiting trial, Elias bought the distressed assets of the startup for absolute pennies on the dollar during the federal liquidation auction. He immediately handed me my 51% controlling interest. I am now the chief executive officer of my own company. Thanks to the flawless risk management algorithm I built, our corporate valuation recently crossed the $50 million mark. I built the massive tech empire Marcus always dreamed of having, and I built it entirely on my own terms. I reach over to the glass coffee table and pick up a crystal goblet filled with an expensive deep red wine. I take a slow, deliberate sip, letting the rich vintage warm my throat. I look directly into the camera lens, reflecting on the brutal but necessary journey that brought me to this exact moment of peace. When Marcus posted that picture of himself with Chloe, he wrote that life finally feels light again. He was right. The process of healing is terrifying. Cutting a physical tumor out of your body hurts, but cutting parasites out of your life, you have never felt lighter. Thanks for listening.